right, it's 3:01 and I think we can get started. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Sri and I'm a communications officer at the Genomics Valence Unit here at the Wellcome Sanger Institute. And it's a pleasure for me to be moderating today's webinar on women in genomics valence. So just a quick note before we get started, the webinar is being recorded and we will share it on our social media channels after the event. The chat and Q&A have also been enabled for you to add any comments and questions as we go along, so I'll do my best to keep an eye and read them out. So genomics surveillance is such a fascinating field, and it's grown rapidly since the COVID-19 pandemic, because we saw for the first time how large-scale sequencing of the SARS-CoV-2 virus around the world, combined with the expertise of data analysis and open data sharing, allowed scientists to study the genomes of COVID-19 and to identify variants. And then this allowed public health officials to make decisions rapidly. And to make this possible, genomic surveillance relies on the combined expertise of various disciplines, ranging from genomic sequencing in the lab to analyzing this data, partner engagement, and project support. So I also think that this is a really timely conversation to be having, because earlier this month, we marked the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, which was on the 11th of February. And now that we're nearly into March, we're approaching International Women's Day, which is on the 8th of March. So in today's session, we have a wonderful panel of my colleagues from the GSU here today, and we'll get to know them, and we can spotlight the kind of roles and the range of expertise that makes this field so dynamic. So welcome everyone again, and I think we can get started with some quick introductions. So maybe starting with Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself briefly and your role within the GSU?
Absolutely, thanks, Drew. So my name is Sarah Stott, and I am the head of genomic surveillance sequencing services at the GSU. So I'm responsible for the end-to-end sequencing service from the time that those samples come to site at the Sanger Institute to the time that we release the data to sequencing data to the bioinformaticians to do their magic with it.
Right, thanks, Sarah. Farah, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Farah Egby, and I am currently in an interim role as head of implementation management. My other role is called Agile Coach, which means that I'm not a yoga teacher. It's more about helping teams to work well together, business processes, team processes, and helping the work to flow through the organization in a smooth way.
Right, thanks, Farah. Ishla?
Hiya, I'm Isla O'Connor. I'm a partner engagement and relations assistant in the GSU, and right now my role mainly involves building and maintaining relationships with members of our malaria genomic epidemiology network.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I think it's great to see the range of roles that are represented on today's panel. Because I think genomics is a diverse field with so many entry points. So often I found that people who come into this field, they come from all these varied experiences and backgrounds. I guess to start with, I'd love to hear more about how each of you found your way here. And maybe if we could start with you, Sarah. I know that you have a really interesting career journey. So would you be able to share how your career path has evolved and I guess like what led you to your role in the GSU?
Absolutely. So I started probably in a relatively linear fashion, straight from university as a graduate, and went into DNA sequencing, some high throughput DNA sequencing for a biotechnology company. But during early career, I think it's really important to think about what you really enjoy. So I decided to go from that high throughput DNA sequencing environment into a research environment. And I worked on some animal virus research for a while, which I found equally kind of interesting, completely different, not the high-paced, kind of high throughput DNA sequencing that I'd been doing. But I gained some really interesting skills in research and slowing down a little bit and thinking a bit more about what I was doing. After that, I did a bit of travel. I did lots of different things and kind of ended up across the world. And then decided to study again and I moved into the forensic science field. And this had always been a real interest for me when I was doing my genetics degree at university. But at that point, when I was doing my degree, it wasn't the field that kind of had become in the later years. So DNA analysis had become kind of a really, really exciting field in forensics. And so I then joined that field and spent 9 years in DNA analysis, first in the laboratory and then in various management roles, working and managing different teams on shift, and then doing a head of department role. And in between that, I also worked in technical development and R&D roles as well. And again, that what I learned during that process was there was a huge variety of things that you could learn from all of those different roles. So as well as learning about the technical side of the business and being able to learn about forensics, I also learned about management and communication and good ways to manage a team and to really get the most out of a team. And so then during the pandemic, decided to complete a change again of role. And I started at the Sanger Institute in 2021 in January, very middle of the pandemic when we were all locked down and in bubbles and all the rest of it. But it felt like the right time for a change. And when I came to Sanger, I thought I was going to have to start almost again. I started in a team lead role within the DNA pipelines teams. And I thought, because I'd been in a different field, that perhaps I wouldn't have as many skills that were going to be translatable. But when I got to Sanger, I found actually that all those skills and all the things I'd learned from my previous roles were really relevant to the roles that I was then going to be doing. So only a month into my role in the DNA pipelines team, I was seconded to the COVID-19 surveillance team. And then I led that team through an enormous transition in 2021, where we scaled our process from 7,000 samples a week up to 70,000 samples a week. And during that transition, we had to learn about the best way to do things, efficiency, operational excellence, how to improve quality of our samples, how to improve our turnaround times, putting into all of the experience that I learned in the forensic field. So really breaking down processes and understanding exactly how long does this process take? How can we make this more efficient? How can we make it more cost effective? Thinking about how do you get the best out of a team when you've got 70 people working different shifts and sometimes don't see each other for weeks on end. How do you manage a team like that? And thinking about where we best make the changes. So thinking about kind of that continuous improvement. So always looking for small incremental changes in the processes. And it really was a huge challenge, obviously, but it was one where I learned a lot. I collaborated with a huge number of people across the Sanger Institute. So not only with the team that were working in the laboratory, but also the importance of all the other roles at Sanger and supporting what we were trying to achieve. And it was really important to make sure that communication was clear, that we really looked at how we collaborated with all these different teams. And those were probably two of the things that were absolutely critical to the success that we had in developing that pipeline and getting it to the point where we got to at the end of 2021. We've since gone through another change. And so actually we've thought about how we then change things going forward. And so that's another learning experience that we're going through at the moment.
Wow, okay. That is some incredible stuff right there. And I think continuous improvement, of course, stands out. But also the fact that you're working with all of these teams, and it does really bring out the collaborative nature of it. And I think that's where, and I think I'll come back to you, Sarah, but just on the same point, I want to come to you, Farah, because your work helps, it helps teams to deliver their work effectively. And because of the collaborative nature of genomics valence, if we're thinking about all of the teams who are processing and sequencing the samples, and then moving into the bioinformatics expertise in the lab, and then coordinating them from like start to finish throughout the pipeline, I guess like that is a key piece of the puzzle as well. So could you tell us about how your journey has led you to your role, and sort of like how that side of things work in the GSU?
Sure. Well, I started off as a chemist. I was a chemistry student, and I loved the subject. I loved all the nitty-gritty theory, and I enjoyed the learning. People talk about chemical intuition, but what they really mean is you have enough experience to make educated guesses, but all the education is stuffed in the back of your head, basically. But my problem is that I didn't like the laboratory. And I really hated it. I felt like I was walking to my doom every single day that I had to spend in the lab, which is not great when you're a chemist, right? Fortunately for me, though, a new field appeared right around the time that I graduated, which is computational chemistry, which means I get to do computational chemistry and not lab chemistry. So I get to sit at a computer every day. I get to analyze data sets and work with various groups who are producing some data, maybe do some modeling, did some calculations on how molecules interact with each other to produce the behaviors that we see in experimental results. So phew, I get to keep the subject that I love, but I don't have to go anywhere near an actual laboratory. So I know a lot of people love it, but it was not for me at all. From there, I ended up in the software industry, designing the very software that I had been using when I'd been studying as a postgraduate. So I was looking at creating materials modeling software. I did a little bit of bioinformatics software, cheminformatics software, experiment management software, and having a bit of that science background was really great because I had a great deal of empathy with how the scientists were working from day to day, some of the language that was a bit easier to pick up as well, and be able to latch onto some of the outputs that our scientists were trying to achieve in their day-to-day work really helped in the design of software. And although I started on the technical side, bit by bit, I found myself looking after our team processes, looking after newer team members, looking after our graduates and interns, and running some of our quality assurance teams. And I found that actually the complexity that I had so enjoyed that was inherent in the subject that was chemistry existed and multifold in the interactions between people. So I decided very gradually over time that people and processes was where I was at. And I have been continuing that career, sitting on the boundary between technology, science, and processes. And I like those intersections. I think they're really interesting. I think the translations of the language that we use with each other is interesting. Communication and clarity is really tricky. Plus the basic thing of not just how we speak with each other as humans, but how we listen with each other, how we work on a day-to-day basis, to me, is just as important as the science that we do. It's how we do the science, how we work together as groups, and how we treat each other. It makes everything more enjoyable, it makes everything smoother, and it actually produces better results.
Wow, thank you, Farah. And thanks for your candor. And one thing I think I'd like to say is that part of the journey is also recognizing what you don't like, in your career, and like making the change towards what you want to do next, and then learning all these things and acquiring these skills. And yeah, it's quite fascinating to know how that happens. And even if we're thinking about collaboration, I mean, both Sarah and Farah spoke about sort of managing all these different teams and different areas of expertise, and collaboration does stand out, but that's kind of like maybe internal. But if we're thinking about the more cross-disciplinary and like international collaboration, I want to come to you, Ishla, because I know you work in that sort of partnerships and a partner support role within malaria genomics at the GSU. So could you tell us about your role and your career experience and journey?
Absolutely. Yeah, so most of what I've done to date has been focused on malaria. But even though everything I do happens within the same disease area, all of my work has been very, very different. So some things I try to do are to let partners know that their genomic sequence data is available, support the publication of some of our open data resources, and try to surface details of our partners' ongoing work on our website. So like Sarah and Farah were saying, it is just a very collaborative environment, and everything I do tries to work with other people's work as well. One of my main responsibilities is administering a procurement support grant. And this is designed for malaria research labs that are facing significant procurement challenges. Mainly it aims to provide access to consumables and lab equipment that are ordinarily challenging to source through local supply chains. And even though that grant is closed now, we're still working on it, and it's been a really interesting experience hearing the different sorts of challenges that people are facing when it comes to getting the same equipment, even through the same transport means into different labs. Another responsibility of mine has been drafting a position paper on open data sharing in malaria genomics. This is very different to administering the grant, but it's equally as interesting in a different way. And the start of that process was discussing experiences of open data sharing with a number of our malaria gen partners. So yeah, while collaboration and teamwork is always a constant, the scope of the role is quite broad, and what I do changes a lot. But I am ultimately somehow involved in supporting our external malaria gen partners. My path to here, I don't think felt very well signposted, I was going to say. I just kind of followed what I was interested in. So I did an undergrad in genetics, and then I did a postgrad in bioethics. I got a job working in science policy and was part of a team that focused on global genomics policy, specifically on global health equity, and managing an online network there that has led me very neatly to where I am now, and love working with our team and doing the work that we do.
Wow, thanks, Ishla. I think one thing that stands out from all three, experiences that you've spoken about is that I guess change is a constant, but also because genomic surveillance as a field kind of thrives on global partnerships, especially if you want to use it as a tool for epidemic and pandemic preparedness. We must be prepared to sort of evolve with the field as it goes. And just, if we're taking a moment to think about sort of how individuals could navigate that, maybe there might be people listening today who are also like earlier on in their careers. And if you could give people sort of share your experience sort of navigating those changes throughout your career, like what would it be? Were there any like tools or networks, anything that you found useful? Maybe I'll come to you, Sarah, or maybe Farah. I don't know if you want to get started with that.
I'm happy to start. I think being open to whatever comes along. So I think, actually, as Ishla was saying, sometimes, it kind of, you're not sure how you get somewhere, but actually being open to that opportunity, making sure that you take those opportunities when they come along, and don't doubt that you've got the skills available, because all your experiences previously lead you to having learned something, and actually applying that learning to different situations is super, kind of important. And I think that's what I have learned, through changing fields a couple of times over the years, and I'm sure Farah, you're the same, is that actually you can take all those learnings from your previous roles and apply them to different situations. And I think don't be afraid to try new things. Don't lab. If you're stuck in the lab, don't be afraid to do some data at some point. Don't be afraid to learn something different, because actually, I always think if I learn something every day, even if it's something really silly, so even if it's something like I learn a new formula in Excel, that's great, because actually I've learned something different that day and I can apply it again in the future. So I think all those little things add up in as you go through your career, and can apply them as you go along your journey.
That's really useful advice. And Farah, if I can come to you and ask, I guess like thinking about the future of the field now that we've established it is ever changing. Do you see the way that we work in this field changing over the next few years? Because obviously there's always new partnerships to be built, new collaborations coming in, new technologies even. So how does that how do you think that will change the way that we work in this?
Well, I mean, maybe somebody's waiting for me to say something like artificial intelligence, but really, apart from acknowledging that it's there, and it is there, I think we have vast amounts of data. When I did my PhD, the kind of data sets that we had were tiny compared to what you can have now. We dreamt of having this terrible problem of what do we do with all this data? This was our dream, and it's here. So yes, technologies will evolve, and we will need to carefully curate those technologies in order to get the best out of them. So I would also like to separate the general ChatGPT type AIs from our specific algorithmic analysis, which we will be designing, and those kind of skills will be useful. But there is something at the core of everything that doesn't change, which is that we are interacting with each other, and that we are people, and that we mustn't lose sight of that. So for me, the thing that is really pertinent in this world of change are the things that stay the same, which is that we need to be working together, we need to be collaborating, we need to be making an effort to listen, understand, and perhaps be a bit generous sometimes with our understanding and our clarifications as well. We need to find ways of working with each other, both internally in our teams and outwardly facing, communicating, and remembering to retain our humanity in amongst all the technological changes. I couldn't have possibly predicted where technology would be now. When I exited university 20 years ago, it's just astounding. So I'm not going to try and predict where it might take us in the next 20 years. It will take us somewhere, but at the heart of it, we'll still be there. We will still be us. We will still be humans. And that to me is the really important thing that we have to keep close and keep alive, and also to consider that it is work too. Working with people is work. Our interactions take effort. It takes effort to listen. It takes effort to have empathy. It takes effort to understand what somebody might mean. It takes effort to explain what we mean, and that we should make those efforts. I'm not a fan of the term soft skills because I don't think they're soft. I think they're jolly hard. And we should all make the effort to hone those skills, because I think that will smooth the path for whatever technologies land in our working arenas over the next decades.
That's really profound. So much to think about there. But I think what you said about, at the end of the day, remembering that we are people, I think that will stick with me for sure, especially in this age of like AI, I suppose, where there's more tools than we can try and keep up with. I think that's something to remember all the time. But if we are thinking about technological advancements, I guess, or like new technologies, if I could come back to you, Sarah, from the sort of lab and sequencing side of genomic surveillance, there's also lots of emerging technologies, new ways of sequencing. So what do you think, are there things that stick out to you at the moment? Like, what do you think will be game changers in this field, just for people listening? And what's something to watch out for example?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from the pandemic. I think we've learned a lot about what we can do, because I don't think anyone imagined that we could do that before the pandemic, that we got to the scale of sequencing that we did do, and in the speed that we did it. And the information that we now have on that one single pathogen is amazing. There's a huge bank of information on that. We've learned a lot. I think now, really, everyone's starting to look at thinking about what we can get now from perhaps one sample, and actually, can we get multi-pathogen information from that? So actually, we're not looking at a single pathogen now. We're looking at, kind of other viruses. So from one single sample, we can look at many, many viruses, what's present in that sample. And that's where, we are kind of looking now. It's looking, in terms of pandemic preparedness and thinking about the future, thinking about actually that surveillance is, we need to know what's out there. We need to know what's circulating at any one time in the environment and in the populations, so that we can be a bit more prepared next time. And we don't have to shut everybody down and shut everybody in the homes and go into lockdowns again, because we know what a big impact that had on people's lives. So I think it's really about that preparedness and thinking, okay, so let's have a look at what's out there and what other respiratory viruses could possibly cause something like this in the future. Let's put some pipelines and some processes in place to be able to deal with this. It's a huge amount of data. So when you're not just sequencing one pathogen, but you could be sequencing several at a time, there is a huge amount to do on the data side. So again, it's thinking about how do you use this data? How do you store this data? How do you generate this data? And I think when we then kind of look outwardly as well, so obviously the respiratory viruses in many countries are a big issue, but there are lots of other pathogens that are causing problems in lots of other countries around the world. And so it's also thinking about how we can use the processes that we put in place. So how do we test these processes and then turn them around to look at other pathogens in other places? So being able to share our technologies, being able to share our processes with other countries, with other labs around the world, so that they can do their own sequencing, so they can do their own work. We can help them there, we can help with the data, we can help all of that. But we've got the kind of the knowledge sharing, to be able to go out there. So we've learned a lot. Let's now turn it around and think about how we can share this with those people that need it in other countries.
Thanks, Sarah. So I guess what I'm hearing is that, well, we're looking at the future. We're trying to lay this groundwork to enable surveillance of lots of other global health threats, because we may not necessarily know what's coming down, or whatever new disease might pop up. But when we have preparedness, it's all about like incorporating all of these different technologies and learnings that we've had from COVID-19 and other disease areas, and also making it equitable and ensuring that the field is growing for everyone. And on that note, I guess if we're thinking about how the field is continuing to grow, Ishla, I wanted to ask you, why do you think prioritizing inclusivity and equity in global health partnerships is important to genomic surveillance? And I think this is something that is exemplified by the MalariaGen network. So through supporting open genomic data sharing, and why is that essential for the future of the field?
Yeah, it's a big question, but I think this is about, while it's really important that we've got all the technical side of it absolutely perfect, when it comes to data sharing initiatives like MalariaGen, or even just like Sarah was saying about COVID sequencing, there's more to it than the technical stuff. It's a non-negotiable. You need to have it, and so much work goes into having it. But without, I suppose, prioritizing inclusivity when you're actually rolling something like this out, you're going to end up missing an awful lot of people and excluding people from using a valuable resource. And I think MalariaGen is an incredible example of getting the balance between that technical expertise and then also trying to balance the human aspect that we keep coming back to, because it's people that are going to be using these at the end of the day, and people who are contributing data. So MalariaGen, from my understanding at the very, very beginning, ultimately really prioritized good governance, and trying to, make that a core value of the network, and making sure that partners were acknowledged as owning the data, and their work and involvement was publicized. And if there was knowledge sharing, required for genomic analysis, or even generating publications, that people working at MalariaGen tried to support that where possible. And I think when you're trying to organize a massive genomic surveillance data sharing network, actually building the relationships with the people, demonstrating trustworthiness, actually taking people's concerns into account, those are essential, but they take years and years of collaboration. It's not easy. I wasn't there in the beginning, but I can promise you, if you speak to anyone who was, they will tell you that it was super worthwhile, but obviously these things take time. But I think what MalariaGen has managed to achieve through doing all of that is something that really proves that it's really worth it, and it does work. And taking a long-term, looking at things with a long-term perspective is a really valuable thing to do, both for obviously from an equity perspective, but from a scientific one too. I think we like to separate the two, but they're actually you can't. You have to keep them and consider them as a unit. But I also think that some of the challenges that that we face when we're trying to make these inclusive, equitable, long-standing relationships, some of these issues are things organizations like MalariaGen or initiatives like MalariaGen can't address, but we can surface these issues. And by building these partnerships with lots of different people, we hear so many different perspectives from people about what they actually are facing on a day-to-day basis, the actual barriers that they have to doing the research that they want to do. And we play a role, we should play a role in anyone who is involved in such a far-reaching network for maybe other disease areas should try to surface those challenges and because maybe some people haven't heard, we're having these one-to-one conversations with people, they're real relationships with partners. We're going to hear things that are unique to them, and maybe those could be part of a solution to a far-reaching problem that that hasn't been heard yet. But I'm digressing. So I guess I want to say that yes, it should be the future of genomic surveillance, partnerships and inclusivity, and doing like what Farah said. It's these soft skills aren't soft; they're hard. They take time, but we need them alongside whatever shiny tech comes in to be able to actually make sure that this research can be utilized to help people at the end of the day, because that's what everyone wants. I'll leave it there. I could go on for ages, but I won't.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely spot on, because I think that is the way to ensure that we can maximize the outputs of something like genomic surveillance, by ensuring that it is truly, you can truly have that global impact, because as we know, diseases don't really have borders, and all of these things don't really matter when there's an outbreak. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Just as a quick reminder to our listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the Q&A or chat boxes, and I can pick them up. But I'm also looking at the time, and I just wanted to, I think, maybe head towards some like more final reflections from everyone. If we could start with Sarah, maybe. Yeah. So, yeah, if you could just say what your final thoughts are.
Yeah, I think in terms of kind of career and where we're going, I think that you kind of setting out on your career, have a thought about where you might go. And I think we probably all had a thought about where we might go in our careers. And I think that we should make sure that, yes, maybe we have a plan, but actually make sure that we keep ourselves open and ready for those opportunities that might just turn up and suddenly, kind of surprise us. And you might end up running a COVID sequencing laboratory, which 5 years beforehand would never have entered your thought process, and now be, on a path to working with, wider pathogens and genomic surveillance, and having an impact globally. So it's most definitely not what I thought I was going to be doing when I was first a graduate 25 years ago. And my path has changed many times along the way. So yeah, I think it's definitely thinking about making sure that you're open to those challenges, taking the challenge on. And sometimes it will go well, and sometimes it might not go your way, but actually always learn from it, because you'll be able to apply that learning at the next challenge.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And Farah, would you agree, as somebody who's also had a sort of similar, really varied career? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely second all of that. I'd love to add that I think intentional reflection is a really important thing. And every now and again, just to stop and reflect on where you are and what you want to do, what makes you happy. Because sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day busyness of things. And that can sometimes lead us to perhaps ignore some of the things which are either catching our attention in a positive way or indeed in a negative way. I do think that science is a wonderful way of getting critical thinking training, and that you can apply that to anything. You can apply that to buying your next TV, uh, as well as all the day job and as well as all the scientific careers. But that said, I wouldn't discount the influences of things that you learn from outside, people that you know from anywhere. One of the best books that I ever read on systems thinking was actually about art history, and it meant a lot more to me than any of the business books that I read in the meanwhile. So I really do think that being interdisciplinary, whether you're in the core sciences or on the support side, is really an important and wonderful thing. And gathering those people that you meet along the journey, they're people who inspire you. Keep in touch, make that effort to keep in touch. People talk about networking, but honestly, most of my networking isn't through events where I'm handing out some non-existent business card. I don't remember the last time I had business cards. It's people in my network that inspired me along various jobs, various evening classes that I went to, and that I'm keeping in touch with, even just in a light way, just to see what people are up to, be inspired by a broader range of things than just what's going on in my life.
Thank you so much. And, just speaking about transferable skills, somebody in the chat has asked, so Kirsty Davies, thank you for submitting your question. So they're asking a question for Farah. And they say, I really enjoyed hearing about how you got into computational chemistry. I'm in a similar situation where I've just finished my PhD and would like to get into computational biology rather than lab work, but I have a small amount of experience in genomic data analysis and self-taught coding in R. My question is, how did you show your transferable skills effectively to be able to move from lab work into a computational position?
Wow. Well, good luck. I think that sounds like a very exciting thing. And our statistics, wow, that was even going back in the day when I was doing technical things. So in terms of the transferable skills, I think it is about experimenting. There is a lot, I think, in our scientific world where we bring up the word data, and this is something that Sarah also brought up earlier. If you can look for opportunities to work with data, I think that often shows a lot. You obviously are interested in the statistical side, you're using R, but also if there's an opportunity to look at even just little bits of scripts and things like that that you might be able to contribute to your group, all of that does help to show your computational skills. And I wouldn't discount your general computational skills as well, in terms of being able to work your way around your regular machine. All of that really helps. The number of times that I have been involved in configurations, which mean digging a little layer deeper in my own laptop in a technical role, actually really helps. It sounds like something that people would discount, but it's kind of important to know how the thing works. So have a little bit of knowledge about computers themselves and take opportunities to work with data where you can.
Thank you. That was really sort of detailed. I am looking at the time and we are almost at the end. So Isla, I just wanted to ask whether you have any final reflections or thoughts. And apologies, I can see some questions coming in, but we may not have time to answer all of them. But Isla, please do go ahead.
I'm going to just parrot advice that other people have given me, because I don't know, do I feel qualified yet to advise on careers or have reflections on that. But I think don't worry too much about having a linear path or moving. If you're in a role, I'm kind of speaking to what Sarah and Farah have said, but just in a different way. But just because a role is the next step up for you, if you don't automatically go for that, just because you think it's the logical next step. Don't be afraid of taking a step to the side in just strengthening skills in other areas that you might not necessarily feel are relevant yet, but you're interested enough in to say, yeah, I'll actually sit through a LinkedIn learning for however many hours and I'll get through that. Sometimes that's enough. And just because you don't know exactly where you're headed doesn't mean you're not going anywhere. I think I felt like that a lot, where I was like, but what's next? It's, if you're going, you're going, you will figure it out. You have 40 something years working, hopefully. You'll be fine. What's a year? Yeah, that's it basically.
If you're going, you're going. Wise words. So Heather's also asked, I think, a question for you, Farah, whether you can provide the link to the book that you referred to. Don't know if you're
All
able
right,
to.
it was called Vermeer's Hat, and it was by, I think it's by Thomas Brooker, but it's called Vermeer's Hat, so that's quite a distinctive name.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are actually over time, so I'm afraid I have to wrap up. So thank you so much to our panelists and to our listeners today. And I hope you found this conversation insightful. I hope you felt inspired. And I think it helped you think, I hope it helped you think about how we can support a field that's more inclusive and impactful ultimately. So just as a quick note, there's going to be a brief survey that's going to go out at the end of this webinar. So please do take a few moments to tell us your thoughts about today's session, what resonated with you, do you have any feedback, and we can use that to improve our future sessions. Thank you again for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.